What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Accounting Flow podcast brought to you by Financial Sense. This podcast is dedicated to taking a deep dive into accounting firm workflow and processes. Each episode, we will spend 20 minutes interviewing actual accounting firm owners just like you, uncovering specific processes that firm owners and operators encounter on a daily basis and discuss ways to improve them. Let's go. And welcome to another episode of Accounting Flow. Today, we've got the Nikole Mackenzie, founder and CEO of Momentum Accounting. Nicole, thanks for joining.
Hey, Roman, good to see you as always.
As always, I'm fortunate to have gotten to know Nicole quite well over the last few years. And today we get to have a conversation around onboarding workflow, onboarding process, all the things around onboarding. So, Nicole, first, before we jump into that, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about your firm.
Sure. So I personally have been in the accounting industry for 14 years, which is crazy to say. Started Momentum 7 years ago. I like to refer to us as a CAS advisory firm. So mostly CAS focused with a little bit of advisory in there as well. So we've got a team of 9, mostly US based, a couple in the Philippines, one in El Salvador. We typically work with businesses 1 to 10 million in revenue who are getting it more into like the financial ops. So we do a lot of technology implementation and then do the full, we call it like a fractional accounting department.
Yep. And so do you work with any specific industries or are you agnostic?
We have a lot of industries we prefer not to work with, but for the most part, it seems to be a lot of B2B service businesses, some blue collar service businesses, and some technology businesses. Those are kind of like our 3 primary types.
Okay, so you do serve a variety of industries. You have a dispersed team. Is everybody remote? Do you have an office?
No office. So I've actually been remote for 10 years. So that went well. Actually, it was funny before COVID. I remember always having to explain to people what Zoom was. And
Sure.
then, so we were a little bit ahead of the curve there. And then Zoom kind of catapulted everything on the same page as us. So good and bad there. I think initially before Zoom, we were able to price a lot higher. And now there's just a lot more saturation in general in the CAS market.
Yeah, we've definitely seen a lot of change in our industry, particularly as it relates to hiring a remote workforce and onboarding. When you started, did you have an onboarding process? Like, at what point in this journey did you say, okay, I probably need to start focusing on this?
Oh gosh, good question. No. So initially it was just me, right? I'd be doing like fractional controller work. And then when I started hiring people, but a lot of what we used to do was going on site to clients who had an in-house accountant who were paper-based, and our onboarding process was essentially building a cloud-based accounting system for them. Where it's at now today, now that we have a bigger team, I am able to do the sales. And then essentially once the deal closes, it gets handed off to our onboarding manager, Jen Hoover. So part of, I think, a good onboarding process is having a good sales process. Mm-hmm. And what I do is during the sales process, we use Go Proposal, and I put an entire project plan on there. So it's really understanding what the client needs and then what's hot, what's burning for them, so we can prioritize certain things. So for example, if they, getting your people paid and invoicing are always the most number one things to focus on, getting money in the door and getting your people paid. So we'll go through, I'll put together an entire 2 to 3 month project plan for the client so they understand order of operations, whether that be, and also handoff and accountability, right? So if we're taking over payroll and there's training that needs to be done, week 1 is we're getting access to everything. Week 2 is we're getting training. Week 3 is we're taking over full accountability. So after the client signs the everything that's on our proposal that we've agreed to do, our admin uploads into our project management system. So the team knows exactly what they need to do on an ongoing basis, and then also what's priority during onboarding. And then I also record a video of my takeaways from big picture, what the client's looking for, what's most important to them. So the client knows, because there's always like little things you pick up during the sales process, right? That you're like, oh, this is really important for the client. We want to make sure that we make them happy in this one area that may not be documented on the proposal. And then after the deal closes, I send a kickoff email with, it's a template we have. We use a tool called Hiver that connects to Gmail, and it's basically a request list of access to everything, bank accounts, software, etc. And then after I send that email, I assign it to Jen. So Jen's our onboarding manager. She's then fully accountable. I basically handed off the baton to her to take it from there.
Okay, I'm gonna stop you there. There's a lot to dig into. So I heard go proposal, so sales process, sales software. I heard a workflow management system. You've got onboarding manager, you've got admin, then you've got yourself, and then you've got communication happening kind of between you all, and then within systems of knowledge transfer. And then you've also got a project plan that's 2 to 3 months long, focused on key initiatives up front that that are high priority items for the client. So let me take a step backwards and say, when was the point in time in which you realized you needed an onboarding manager? Because I suspect you were doing all of that prior to hiring somebody.
So yeah, I used to do sales and onboarding, and then I was lucky enough to have a director of operations for 3.5 years, and ultimately she ended up doing sales and onboarding. And now she left at the end of last year. So now I've stepped back into sales. And so it was really important to me when I stepped back into sales that I wasn't also doing onboarding. And I actually think that it's better if whoever is doing sales doesn't do onboarding, because it just it's challenging to focus on both, right? And so once I stepped back into sales, I was like, okay, I need like a very clear handoff of sales close. Now it's passed on and I'm not involved anymore. And then also being very clear with the client during the sales calls that like, hey, I'm not the one delivering the services. I'm talking about my team. I'm talking about our process. So I think that was a big transition. So when Ashley left, our director of ops left, I ended up promoting Jen to team lead and onboarding manager. And that's helped a lot, because during the onboarding process, we're building trust. And a lot of times the client doesn't trust us yet. And we have to be very, very highly communicative. They don't remember what they signed. They don't understand. A lot of times it's their first time outsourcing. So they're learning. And so you really need someone that's good, setting boundaries with the client, pushing back, saying, hey, this isn't keeping them on schedule, and then consistently reminding them of what the timelines and deliverables are during the process. Sure. Because, during onboarding, they just throw everything at you. And so I think having that person, whoever's doing the onboarding, needs to be able to keep everyone on task. And then they also doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing the work, right? If there's cleanup work, if there's tech implementations, they may be doing some of it, but they also may be delegating to other team members that are going to be doing the that are going to be doing the ongoing work.
Yeah. And so, gosh, within that, there's so many things that happen in onboarding, whether it's like gaining access to systems, clarifying and walking through these initial and maybe cleanup or catch up phases, system implementations, like you alluded to. Throughout that process, when you're handing that off to the team, you mentioned that you send a kickoff email, and then the onboarding manager is responsible for the next steps there on out. How do you harness clients to take the steps you need them to in order to get your team to like really mobilize to achieve this work?
Yeah. So the first, in that initial email, there's provide a few, actually, no, after the email, Jen reaches out to the client to set up a kickoff call. So the kickoff call gets the team, everybody on the team that will be servicing that client, on a call with the client. And there's like a little PowerPoint presentation we do where we are presenting, Jen's your onboarding manager. This is your controller. This is your bookkeeper. These are the things that the bookkeeper does. This is your point of contact. Use help@momentumaccounting.com. Here's a phone number. Here are all the things we still need access to. So that kickoff call is really getting on the same page with a client, going through the proposal again, just in case, going through the timelines again, reminding them, hey, these are the priority items. Sometimes after the initial 10 minutes of that presentation, Jen might stay on with them and say, hey, let's get access to your bank account and all your systems right now while I have you. Because a lot of times that can hold people up or hold our team up if we can't get access. And then also on that call, she schedules the next 6 weeks out a weekly meeting with the client. So that way there's just this recurring check-in meeting that we can get unstuck if we don't have access to something or we have questions. And then also during that onboarding process, we have it broken down into themes on the meeting. So we may be reorganizing their chart of accounts. And so we need to understand who on their, what their service lines are. So we may focus one 30-minute meeting during onboarding just on their business model and their revenue lines and getting that all corrected on their chart of accounts.
Yeah.
We may spend another meeting on their COGS, right? Who on your team is a direct cost versus overhead? What kind of software subscriptions, what's a direct cost versus indirect, kind of educating the client on why that matters. So ultimately, after onboarding, they got a nice chart of accounts, so we can start looking at margins, things like that.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And one thing I've heard a lot in the industry as it relates to some degree, the commoditization of accounting and bookkeeping services, a lot of people talking about their services in the realm of SKUs. Hey, we've got a bookkeeping SKU, we've got a cleanup SKU, et cetera. How do you ensure that the services that you're providing are in line with what your proposals look like? Because you can either line item it out hyper specifically, or you can leave it a little bit more broad to allow for more flexibility in that onboarding process. How do you guys approach that?
Yeah, so we've never done packages at Momentum. Maybe when I first started, I did. So when I sell something to a client, it's more about the relationship with our firm. Yeah. And it's a diagnosis of what their problem is and how we can solve it. So I don't think of it necessarily in service lines. I think of it more of, here's an ongoing cost and here are all the things that we're going to do for you within the scope. Now, during onboarding, the client may ask for more. They typically leave out a lot of things during the sales process that will pop up, right? Of course. And so during onboarding, we're just making note of those. And then after 90 days or however long, when the onboarding has completed, we have and this is something new that we just started doing, is a offloading of onboarding. So going through, here's what we initially said that we were going to do. Here's what we're actually doing. If a price adjustment needs to happen or scope adjustment, we do that. And then we let the client know, hey, you're out of offboarding now. Jen's no longer your point of contact. Now Ramona is your point of contact, or whoever their main point of contact is.
Okay. You bring up a good point, because in that onboarding process, there inevitably is something that was maybe, let's just say, omitted during the sales scoping process of, oh, we've got this account over here. Oh, we've got this personal card attached here. Oh, we haven't reconciled books for, more months than we thought, or whatever the situation is, right? Like that inevitably happens. And so during that onboarding period, when those things come up that do need that attention during onboarding, how do you handle that? And I guess that's kind of a subsequent question of, how do you price it? How do you manage that side of the relationship?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. So and this happens a lot, especially if we're taking over from somebody who had an in-house accountant before, right? Because a lot of times the in-house accountant are doing other miscellaneous things. So we just started onboarding a client recently, and they hadn't paid in sales tax. And so they had like $100,000 that was just pulled from their bank account by, who does the sales tax in California? I forget what the governing body there is there. But basically they pulled like $100,000. So because the business owner hadn't had a controller for the last 2 months, there was nobody like managing the process, and somebody needed to like emergency call them, get on a payment plan so that they would return the $100,000. And so that was like day one of onboarding. So at this point, like, I'm of the feeling that we need to do right by the client during this 90 days. We might lose, we might win, whatever. Like, let's make a really good first impression. Let's go above and beyond as long as it's in our wheelhouse, right? So that wasn't in scope 100%, right? And then we need to manage the client expectation of, hey, we spent the first 2 weeks trying to like put out all these fires, so we're a little bit behind on these other things. And so it can be really challenging sometimes, but then so I don't worry about it as much then, unless it's something significantly time consuming or like we need to go back an extra year and do books. But
Right.
I'll take the opportunity during the reassessment of like, okay, there are some, we weren't planning on managing sales tax for you, or we weren't planning on managing your Expensify for you. And that popped up during onboarding. So let's add that now to our scope and increase our ongoing fees.
Okay, so you have a templatized approach or kind of a standard way of approaching how you navigate those modifications that you observe during onboarding. Have you gotten any pushback from that, after onboarding saying, hey, these 3 things popped up, here's how it's going to modify your ongoing scope, here's your new price? Because that could come as a surprise to clients.
Yeah, I can sometimes, we definitely had situations where a client thought something was included. And so we try to like over time have just been on our proposal of getting more, adding more and more and more. Like the client assumes responsibility, right? And that's been just years and years of things popping up that just took time to figure out. But a lot of times we can try to keep it within the same price by reassigning something that maybe we took over, and they might say, hey, you know what, I have somebody internally that I pay a salary that can take this. And so we're kind of negotiating with the client of, hey, let's figure out, like, are these things important to you? Is it important that we do them for you? And then we can usually arrive at something that works for both of us.
Yeah. I feel like that's such a good practice that accountants don't resort to, in that, hey, if you want a price adjustment, if you want a decreased cost, here's what the exchange is going to look like. We're either going to move responsibility of these items over to you, or our deliverables timing is going to change, things like that. Instead, accountants are like, yeah, sure, we can do that, no problem. Or it can change things quite rapidly when you start to make concessions on the scoping side of things.
Yeah, we'll play that game a lot as far as like moving timelines around. Or for example, recently we had like 5 clients, smaller clients that we were just over servicing. We were doing like monthly advisory meetings with them. And this came as a result of us wanting to jump into advisory, but not really having a pricing or system. I'm like, let's just roll out reach reporting and do these meetings. And then we have these clients, that are paying us under $1,000 a month that we're just spending a lot of time prepping for the meeting, and they really didn't need monthly meetings. And so basically approached them, was like, hey, we can increase your costs and keep doing the monthly or move to quarterly. And most of them were like, quarterly is totally fine. So in that way, we're not changing the cost, but we are freeing up capacity for our team to work on other clients.
Yeah, I like that a lot. One of the things that I've found to be challenging during onboarding and really just navigating any new client relationship is when they go outside of the bounds of communication. And so an example that I've experienced is, hey, we're in onboarding, have communicated what team member is owning what. Here's how you can communicate with us most effectively, whether it's through a portal or email or Slack or however the statement of work has been assembled. But then inevitably, I get a personal phone call, I get a text or something that is outside of that bounds. And historically, I would just pick up the phone, I would text back, all these things. But then I learned that I was training clients to communicate with me in a specific way that opened up the door for, clearly, this is how I'm going to do everything in the future. That was a really big strain on my time and effort and energy, because it was just one single point of failure in my text. How do you navigate clients that maybe go outside of the bounds? Do you just kind of nudge them back to the scope and how you communicate, or have you experienced that much?
Yeah, good question. We had a really challenging onboarding during last summer. It's just a challenging client, a demanding CFO, and he would like call me every day. And it was, that was an exception. For the most part, during the sales process, clients come in through, a HubSpot meeting. So we're talking over Zoom. So they're not really, they'll have my email address, but they don't have my phone number. And then having that kickoff call reminding them, hey, use help@momentumaccounting.com. And then we give them a phone number for their main point of contact. In some cases, we will also, some of our bigger clients, we will take over their accounting at inbox or have them set one up. So we can actually create a different channel, accounting at abccompany.com. And so it's just like, hey, shoot everything to that one place. And then we'll have one person on our team assigned to do that. And then also those recurring meetings, weekly meetings, create a cadence where it's like, okay, save everything. Ideally, a lot of times, depending on the personality of the client, the ideal situation is like, we're working through things for a week. We're putting together an agenda. We're putting together things we need clarity on. Hopefully the business owner is doing that, but probably they're just sending us emails. And then we use that. They know that's their weekly meeting to get things, questions answered and all that. So they're not reaching out to me.
Okay. So it's really pointing them back to the rhythms that you're establishing during onboarding to say, hey, this is how we communicate. This enables us to be more effective on your account and to serve you more holistically rather than the ad hoc call, text here and there that can really create disaggregated communication amongst the team.
Yeah. And that one we had a challenge with during the summer, it created chaos because he would call me, he would call Ashley, and then like, I wasn't involved in the onboarding process. So I would tell him one thing and then I would try to go back and telephone, get information from my team. And then they'd be like, well, you told me this. And then, or then they would get demanding that we didn't answer within an hour. And so I'm like, okay, I need to get an answer back, but I didn't have enough information. So I gave the wrong answer. And it was just like, oh my God, it was really, really challenging.
Well,
it's like, I need an answer right now, but if you give me the wrong answer, but this was like, I mean, this was a $12,000 a month client where we were implementing Bill.com, TaxJar, Gusto off of QBO's payroll. And, I think we did one other software. I don't know. It was a complete overhaul, coming to a complete mess, trying to do 10 things at once. We've got 5 people working on their account. That was a really challenging thing, is because we had someone managing the Gusto implementation, the build up, like we were just like all hands on deck.
Sure.
And so at this time we didn't have Jen as our onboarding manager. So we had multiple people involved, and that was like a complete breakdown. And so that was actually the impetus of saying, okay, we need one voice, one person that the client is communicating with during the onboarding process. And then they're getting information from all the other individuals who are doing implementations or cleanup work so that they can report that back. And then the Jen is also giving weekly updates. Here's what we did this week. Here's what we're working on next week. Here's what we need from you. Every week, that's like a cadence of an email that goes out.
I think it's such a good practice to have that one person who's in charge of everything, to disseminate information, to create knowledge share and transfer amongst the team. And it just creates a little bit more clarity for the client, I believe, because onboarding at the end of the day is typically the most challenging part of any client relationship. Like those first 90 days are critical, not only to set a good client experience, but also just to set the entire engagement off on the right foot. You'd mentioned templates, like having an email template that you send out. To what degree have you focused on templatization, automation, or any type of like efficiency gains throughout that onboarding workflow?
Yeah, so we've got the email templates. I'm trying to think. We've got the task management system set up. But as far as automation, I think the onboarding process is the most challenging to automate because it's all about communication. It really is like wrapping your arms around the client and making them feel like they made the right decision going with you. Because at this point, they don't trust you yet. At this point, they're like, still like, I made this decision. This is a really big decision. I probably interviewed a bunch of other firms and I decided to go with you. And so really our job is just to make them feel like they did make the right decision and that we've got you. We're gonna, and then keep them focused on the end goal, which is to get their financial functions running seamlessly.
Yeah. And I think right there is the difference between an advisory practice and maybe a more commoditized, productized type service line where they say, oh, like sign up for $300 a month and enter in your information and we'll get everything categorized in a day. And it's like zero strategy, zero tie to the business goals, very little communication, all cash basis accounting. And I believe that's generally a disservice to most companies that have the option between working with an advisory practice, accounting advisory, versus just a productized solution in market that's probably more software focused. And so when you talk about communication and building that relationship in the first 60, 90 days, like you were trying to create connectivity between the business owner and their goals, and then what you guys are doing at the chart of accounts level even. Am I directionally accurate there?
That's exactly right. That you articulated it much better than I did. And it's really starting with when you have that first conversation of why did the client come to you in the first place, and then making sure that gets translated to the team that's actually helping them achieve that goal, right? And I think that happens a lot, like a breakdown between anytime a client comes back to you and is upset about something, it's probably because your salesperson sold something that your team didn't deliver. And is it because the team can't deliver it, or is it because the team didn't know that was important to the client?
Yeah.
So
And
it's communication all the way from internally down the line. And then because then you have sales, and then you have onboarding manager, and then you have the ongoing team. And so that communication internally needs to be really tight too. So another thing our team does is they have internal check-in meetings before every check-in meeting with the client. So there's a lot of meetings happening, but everybody needs to be on the same page.
Yeah. Do you organize internally like Slack channels, or how does like specific client communication occur once you bring a client on board amongst the internal team?
So they have their internal meetings, and then we have a rolling Google sheet that we keep all of our notes and action items on. So anytime we're meeting with a client, that's where all the notes get taken there. And then we just have dial pads. So we don't use Slack really at all. We just don't really have a need for it, because we have our, we have a regular team huddle. They have regular meetings. We've always, because we've operated online so long, it's just and I actually think, I used to work at an office setting. I think working remotely is so much more efficient because you're showing up to a meeting for a certain purpose, and you're taking everything, it's not just, I remember when I used to work at a CPA firm, anytime I had a question for the partner, I would just walk into his office all day long. I just can't imagine getting anything done like that. It's crazy.
Yeah. And that's kind of how Slack is now. It's not only the water cooler, but it's also walking into the office and everything in between. And it can be a distraction, but also we use Slack internally, and I love it. I think it's great. But okay, so you managed a lot of those.
I'm a Slack hater.
Hey, that's fine.
Yeah.
Everybody has their own process. And if it's working for your clients, then you're doing something right. So, all right, we spent a lot of time on onboarding. Last question on that front, and then I'll shift gears slightly. But what over the last, how many years have you been running Momentum now?
7 years.
7 years. Okay, so 7 years of learning and testing and iterating. What do you think is the biggest takeaway or lesson learned as part of just the onboarding period within your firm?
I think the biggest game changer for us was getting the right person to do that role, having a clear cutoff between sales and onboarding, and having everything in your project management system so that the team knows exactly what you sold and then what needs to get done and what the expectations are.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, so now let's look forward a little bit. So there's a lot of evolution occurring in Momentum. I see you on LinkedIn all the time, posting your thoughts and opinions, and I love seeing kind of your angle and take on how advisory should be happening on our industry as a whole. What are you excited about building and kind of continuing to make progress on at Momentum here over the coming months?
Yeah,
years?
good question. So I think we have a big challenge in our industry right now because CAS and advisory, as far as how long accounting's been around, it is very new. And so there's no standard way of what good looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that is because accountants don't have training, right? I came from CPA world and I had to figure all this crap out on my own. A lot of CPA firms are adding on CAS and advisory, and they're maybe hiring somebody to come on to build out that department, but there's no structure on what that's supposed to look like. And so I've been thinking a lot about, with our team, our journey with advisory, probably started 3 years ago of me trying to figure this out, try different things. I've hired CFOs. I tried to refer in CFOs. And none of that worked for various reasons. And then ultimately what I figured out was it was education. It was educating my team, like all of these things that I had gone out and learned, my perception, how I feel as a business owner, how I would want to be talked to if I was working with an accountant. Our team was just never taught that. So what I ended up doing was creating cash flow show podcasts. If you're interested in learning how to talk to CEOs as an advisor, definitely check that out. It's me and Scott Scarano. If you know him, he's my good friend of mine. But what we started doing was so we rolled out Roosh reporting. And when I rolled out Roosh reporting, the team didn't know, because they hadn't built the KPIs and they didn't really understand how to even have an advisory conversation with the client or understand what the back end calculations were. And so we had to slow down and say, okay, let's do like internal role play. So we started doing internal role play. We started doing internal trainings, soft skill trainings, as well as Reach reporting trainings, and then combine that with the podcast, which is all of the concepts that then tie back to the reports and some of those KPIs. So I've been thinking a lot about this need for education in our space. And so I'm excited because I've got something that I'm working on right now that will be a solution for accountants to be able to do an assessment for any business. So any business owner will be able to take this assessment and then it will give them points. So it's called profit points. And what it is, so a business owner takes the assessment. It's like 30 questions, takes less than 3 minutes, and it gives them a score. So, a business owner that's under 40%, probably struggling with cash flow, probably struggling with retention because they don't have enough money to invest in benefits and all of that. They may be in situations where it's hard for them to make payroll. Then you got somebody that's in the middle where they're maybe trickling along okay, but they don't really have excess cash to invest in growth. And then you've got people, which is our end all be all, right? Like we want to move them into that above 70, 80% percentage where they have excess cash. The owner's making the money that they want to make. They're making the profit that they want to make. And so what the assessment does is it allows the business owner to do the self-assessment, but then there's a training component so that the advisor, the accountant, anybody on your team can take this, and it's like a roadmap, right? So we're identifying the challenges that they're having and then the opportunities for you as the advisor to come in and help them get from that 10% to 90%. So my goal with this is, I think the challenge with advisory is it's when you sell our industry is like, here, sell package A, B, and C. And you talked about this, right? Where advisory should really be should be something that you do along the entire client journey, not just a package that you sell. And the challenge with when you sell these packages and you sell advisory, I think that we've all had this feeling of this, like in our stomach of like, oh, I really hope the client doesn't choose that option because then I'm going to have to deliver it, or maybe my team will deliver it. And I'm not sure if they're going to be able to deliver it as good as I can. Right. So advisory gets stuck at the top. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make it a system in education so that anybody on your team, no matter what their level, if they're a senior accountant, if they're a bookkeeper, if they're a controller, they've had these basic fundamental rules that every business owner should know. They should know how to figure out what their cash reserve balance is. They should know what their gross profit margin and why it's important. They should know how to save for taxes and have a good accounts payable process and use the right technology, all of these things, right? And so that's really what the profit points assessment does. It's still an MVP phase right now, but if you're interested in like exploring that, you can definitely, if you go to my LinkedIn profile, I have in the top link there a whole bunch of different links of, I'll have something up there with a profit points interest form on there, but that's what I've got working on right now. I'm really excited to see where that goes.
That is, I couldn't agree more with all of the things you just shared as it relates to education around advisory in our industry and how that occurs at varying levels. But most folks that come out of undergrad that go into public accounting, they're not taught these fundamental business building, finance related points. And it's it's awesome to see you starting to go that direction because it is a massive need in our industry. So I'll be excited to follow along that journey. And I think you mentioned Cash Flow Show as a podcast, LinkedIn. Where else can people find you to learn a little bit more about that and to connect with you?
Yeah, those are the main places. If you go to my LinkedIn profile, I have a link there that with all of my different link to the Cash Flow Show, link to my YouTube, link to my newsletter, all that kind of good stuff.
Perfect. Nikole Mackenzie at LinkedIn.
Yeah. Oh, one more thing I do have on there. If anybody's interested in talking about advisory, I also have a Facebook group called the Reach Reporting Roundtables or Reach Reporting Roundtable Advisory Conversation. So you can find that through that link on LinkedIn or just find it on Facebook. And my name is spelled Nikole Mackenzie, Mack.
Nikole Mack.
Yeah, you got it.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for talking a bit about onboarding and then jumping into some of these profit advisory training points. Love it. And super excited to see where that goes. And again, thanks for joining today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I'll see you soon.
See ya.
Bye.
For listening in today. If you enjoyed the cast, don't forget to share and write a review. This is going to help other firm owners just like you find our podcast and get insights into how to grow their firm. Stay tuned.